Hello, and welcome to the Alpha Male Podcast, the podcast where we talk about what it means to be a man the right way, with God at the center and made in His image, Imago Dei, strong, dominant, and in control, and we don't apologize for it. Now, this episode is intended to be a part 2 of the part 1, entitled Troglodyte James Bond. If you don't know, a troglodyte is a person that lives in a cave. A caveman. A way to bump up those manly skills to the next level. That podcast ran kind of long and there were several skills I didn't go to. So let's delve into those today. Let's talk about defense. As I mentioned, I've done podcasts on skills every man should know, every alpha male should know. If you want to take it to the next level of your defense, in addition to being able to throw a punch, being able to handle a firearm, I'm going to talk about having some skill with a melee weapon. Now, part of my EDC is a knife. I carry a fixed blade day to day. A lot of people carry a folding knife. Whatever kind of knife you carry, I think it ought to be able to pull double duty as a defensive tool. Now, some states, and by that measure I must deduce that perhaps European countries, dissuade you from carrying a knife for defense. So there's that. But if you can carry a fixed blade knife or a folding knife, there's been more than one episode about knives. But can you use said knife? And I don't mean to open an Amazon package. I mean to defend your life. Defend the lives of those around you. I advocate carrying a firearm on you all the time, day to day, when you're outside the house, and one inside the house for home defense. But in general, if you can, then be armed. That being said, there may be times where you can't have a firearm on you, but you can have a knife. There may be times, and I'm a big fan of practicing speed reloads. I've won quite a few speed shooting competitions. Steel Challenge is kind of drag racing with a pistol. USPSA is very much dependent on quick reloads. However, in an actual encounter, a lot of fights end up on the ground, even gunfights. Going for that knife may be a better option than trying to reload or fix a malfunctioned pistol. Being able to use that knife to even get to my gun, because maybe got two guys on top of me and I'm laying on the side that my gun is on, or they've got one arm pinned behind my back, and I generally make it a point to carry my knife on the opposite side of my gun. So if I can't get to the gun, then perhaps I can get to the knife and fight my way to my gun. There's a lot of reasons why even if you have a gun, or even if you train with a gun, you should train defensive use with a knife. I think every man ought to have a knife, know how to be safe with a knife. But if you want to take it to the next level, you ought to know how to fight with a knife. You ought to have some martial skill with a knife. And perhaps if you don't have firearms, or the ability to carry a firearm or have a defensive firearm, perhaps a different kind of melee weapon, a knife in addition to something else. I don't care if that's an e-tool, an entrenching tool. In the Marine Corps we learn how to fight with a small shovel. There's a reason for that. It's a nasty melee weapon. I don't care what that is for you. It could be a staff. Cultures throughout history, throughout all parts of the world, have different disciplines of some kind of blunt staff instrument. A blunt stick, for lack of a better term, and different cultures had different preferred shapes and sizes or whatever, but that may be the best option for you. Inconspicuous, perhaps you're older, perhaps you're already carrying a cane, perhaps you just live in a place where that's your best option, but a melee weapon of some kind. If you're a truck driver, I don't care if that is a tire iron. Know how to use it, not just like I can pick it up and hit somebody with it. 12-year-old girl can pick up a tire iron and hit somebody with it. Talking about being proficient with it. An example is I was a police officer. I carried a PR-24. That's a side handle baton. There's a difference between just wildly swinging that thing, practicing and training with it. It's eye-opening the precision and added force you can add to that object to project force on another when you train with it. So having some kind of martial skill with a melee weapon, and I'm not going to dictate what that is, because it may apply differently to you depending on what's commonly accepted in different cultures. I don't care for you, that's a bike chain with a hefty padlock on it. Train with it. That's a martial weapon. That is a melee weapon. Having some kind of skill with a melee weapon. That's manly 2.0 right there. I've done a whole other one on improvised weapons, but another one that's real popular in today's culture, a water bottle. Having a stainless steel water bottle with some water in it is not out of place, I don't think, anywhere nowadays. Be Outer Mongolia. But most places in the Western world having a metal water bottle. Some of these are better shaped than others, but filled with water, and let's say tying a piece of 550 cord or a braided piece of 550 cord onto the handle to better grasp it and be able to swing it. If that's your best option for defense, sadly, at least know how to use it and train with it. That's what I'm talking about. The next one I'm going to talk about, I often wavered back and forth on whether or not I would talk about it because it might be hard for you to train. Of all the skills, like if you have never taken a formal firearms class and then taken several on defensive firearms use and things like that, I would do that first. I've never had any kind of outdoor survival training, I would get that first. But defensive driving, as you might imagine if you listened to the bio before, I've had some driving training, let's just say that way. I've been in quite a few vehicle pursuits. Let's just say I've successfully culminated and brought to a safe conclusion, at least safe for me, my partners, many a vehicle pursuit. Knowing how to drive, yeah, that you probably should know how to do that. Defensive driving, perhaps offensive driving. Now, a lot of places teacher will call it defensive driving, whether it's defensive or offensive. This might be hard for you to learn, and it might be quite expensive. But if you have the wherewithal, you have the resources, if you have the ability or the opportunity, defensive driving, knowing how to get a vehicle off the road when they don't want to be taken off the road. Just like there's certain places on the human body you can hit and incapacitate. There's certain places on a vehicle without a lot of force that you can, let's say, contact and push somebody off the road, the pit maneuver. Those kind of skills. Knowing how to recover from a skid, that's something that come in handy day to day. Knowing how to start to lose control in a vehicle and then regain control at high speeds. That's a pretty good skill to have. And tacking onto this, it really has nothing to do with defense, but knowing how to recover a vehicle, knowing how to drive off-road whether or not you have a four-wheel drive, knowing how to recover somebody else's vehicle and sometimes your own vehicle, how to use boards, how to use ropes, how to use tow straps and chains, pull somebody out of a snowbank, a ditch, things like that. I think that's kind of driving brought to a manly alpha male skill level, that next level. Here's one. Being able to apply a tourniquet. It's a skill. If you taught yourself an alpha male, you ought to know how to throw on a tourniquet, both yourself and somebody else. You ought to know how to crank down a tourniquet. Not trying to figure it out on the fly when somebody's bleeding to death. I mean, being able to know where to place a tourniquet in relation to an injury and knowing how hard to crank it down, knowing when is best and when not to remove clothing from an area, things like that. But boil that down, knowing how to throw on a tourniquet quickly. I think taking that to that next level. Talking about firearms. I think even if you live somewhere in Europe or somewhere where you can't even have a reasonable ability to own a defensive handgun or something like that, you should still be proficient with a handgun. I think that's basic. Ironically, when I was in the military, I was going through an army school and they did not let me have firearms. It is what it is, right? I was still big into competition shooting at the time. When I got there, I forget if it was like the base bus or Uber or something, I went out to Walmart and I bought, I think, a BB gun and an airsoft gun, and I trained with them in the barracks. They're not a firearm. They're plastic. And I trained and dry fire with those, and like a day or two after I flew out of that school, grabbed my guns and went to a competition, and I got, by God's grace, first place in a West Coast regional championship. Not touched a real gun in who knows how long. It just goes to illustrate that you can be proficient, know how to handle a firearm, even if you can't handle a real firearm all the time. So knowing that, there's really no excuse for that, I don't think, no matter where you live. Taking that to the next level, if you are able to have a firearm, not just knowing how to handle that gun safely, the 4 firearm safety rules, which are very important, but that's vanilla. You want to take it to the next level? 2 skills on that I think you should build on. C.Q.B. I'm big on accuracy. I tout accuracy in handgun shooting more than most, I think, in my training. That said, there are a lot of times, again, where fights go to the ground. Knowing how to fight hand-to-hand is a basic skill. Knowing how to fight hand-to-hand, incorporating a firearm, taking away a firearm from somebody else, getting your firearm out, and being able to fight incorporating a firearm. Start out with a handgun because that's what you're most likely to have on you, assuming you're allowed to be armed most of the time. Taking that firearm skill to the next level. The next one I'm going to add to that is room clearing. I was a urban warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps under Mojave Viper. I was also the commander of a tactical team to stop active shooters. To name a few things I've done with room clearing. It is a real world skill today with armed evil men in this world. And let's face it, a lot of that evil stuff happens in an urban environment. If that's the case, you ought to be able to navigate that kind of environment and take on an adversary in that kind of environment, to face and overcome that evil adversary in that environment. Knowing basic room clearing. Know the most advantageous way to enter a structure, minimizing your exposure and maximizing your tactical advantage to take out an adversary. That's what I'm talking about. Another one I think is really good and important for alpha male health and well-being. Being comfortable in the wild. Jesus often went out to the wilderness by himself. Often withdrew to a desert place, it says. Now he often went into the city and preached, but he often withdrew to be by himself in the desert in a wild place. Being able to be out in the wild. Not only that, but being out in the wild alone, by yourself. Without the buzzing of a smartphone. Without the scrolling of Instagram. Without electricity. Without bells and whistles and screens. Life outside of a box. You weren't created to live in a box. Going from one cube and getting into a mobile cube to drive to another cube. And maybe picking up supplies in another cube before you head back to the original cube. Be comfortable outside, in the wild, in an open, secluded place. It's good for you as a man. It's good for your soul. It's good for your health. Are we not called to walk like Jesus walked? Well, Jesus withdrew into the wilderness by himself. Many times it's mentioned in the Gospels. Anyway, that's, I think, the skills we're going to talk about for this second half of Troglodyte James Bond. Moving on from the skills, I want to talk about something. Being dangerous as a man is not a bad thing, no matter how much society tries to paint it as being bad. Dangerous men can be either good or bad, but being dangerous, many of these skills would make you a dangerous man, is neither good nor bad. It's not malum in se. It's not evil by nature. It's what you do with these skills. If you come upon an active shooter, do you want a passive, weak man stumbling across that, or do you want a dangerous, strong man to show up to that situation? Jesus told his disciples, if you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and buy one. Also, I'd point out that God gave his angels swords. Good angels, righteous angels, doing good. There's nothing wrong with being a dangerous man. We are made in the image of God, Exodus 15. The Lord is a man of war. Anyway, some thoughts on that. Different format for this episode. I'm going to put the bio in after this. I'm going to do the tactical verse so you don't miss out on that. And then if you've heard the bio over and over again and don't want to hear it, you can just end the episode. And if you haven't heard it, you just stumbled on the podcast and you want to know, who's this guy talking and should I even listen to this guy? You can keep listening. Then Jesus spoke to them again, saying, I am the light of the world. He who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but have the light of life. I hope that you only listen to me and agree with me so far as I listen and follow and agree. with the Word. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The beginning of the Gospel of John. With that, I'm going to plug in the bio. Then I'll throw in a tactical tip at the end. So, who am I? Who is this person talking to you from across the internet? Why should you listen? First and foremost, I am a Christian, a servant of God, and a follower of Jesus Christ. God has blessed me to do many things in my life, for I could do nothing apart from Him. U.S. Marine Corps combat veteran, did a couple of tours in Iraq. As an assaultman after my combat tours, I was an urban warfare instructor for the Marine Corps under Mojave Viper. Also served in the U.S. Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. Also did several years in law enforcement, LAPD. I worked regular assignments and more specialized assignments. Been a private contractor for a 3-letter government agency. That's all I'll say about that. Been blessed to be a state rifle and pistol champion. And West Coast Regional Rifle Champion. Won more shooting competitions with the talent that God's given me than I can actually remember. Was blessed to be the commander of a tactical team in a large metropolitan area. Our primary job, the reason we primarily existed, was to stop active shooters. I got the opportunity to head up and be the commander of that team. I grew up around guns, hunting and shooting and competing at a very early age. Been blessed to hunt all over this beautiful country, from whitetail on the East Coast to mule deer on the West Coast, and bear and elk and all manner of things. I've even been a professional big game hunter and guide. But again, most importantly, I'm a Christian. And I am your host, Michael Melito. Tactical tip of the day. Antibiotics. Because you can't shoot your way out of an infection. I submit if you had a life-threatening infection, you would give up any earthly wealth that you had, any amount of gold or money. If you had gangrene, a severe infection, for a life-saving dose of antibiotics. Antibiotics are cheap now. I would surmise that a large chunk of the audience here are preppers and in preparedness, but not everybody is. You may or may not know this. Do your own research. I'm not telling you it's safe. I am not a doctor. I am not a nurse. I don't play one on TV. I didn't stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night. I'm telling you that antibiotics are a thing. Antibiotics for animals are a thing. Do your own research and see if those antibiotics, by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses, a matter is established. Do your own research and see if those same antibiotics in the exact same pills and the exact same doses and the exact same active ingredients don't come off the exact same assembly line. And think about that. There may come a day, as we saw in the last several years, where things change rapidly in modern society. You may not always be able to count being able to go to a hospital or a doctor, or maybe you can't even get there. You're somewhere where you can't get there. Maybe there's supply chain issues and you get there, but they just don't have what you're looking for or what you need. Self-reliance, have it for yourself. Talking about a manly skill, you might want to write on the bottle, if you had such antibiotics, common infections, what dose to take, let's say of doxycycline or of penicillin. What is the common dose recommended by medical professionals? However many milligrams over however many days. And write that on the bottle in case something happens and the internet's not a thing. And having some of those antibiotics on hand. Penicillin, amoxicillin, doxycycline. I'm not telling you it's safe to take them or use them unless prescribed by a doctor. I'm just telling you to think for yourself. And do what you want with that information. With that, men, thanks for listening and have a blessed day.